Hi everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining the MLA Updates Impact Series. This is an opportunity for us to give you an update on our key programs of work that are creating impacts across the industry and supporting the industry's goal to double the value of red meat sales by 2030, which is the key overarching goal of the Red Meat 2030 plan, so the whole of industry strategic plan. This series over the next 5 weeks will build on our series from last year, so the 2020 program where we reported back to stakeholders on the progress of many of our important R&D and marketing initiatives. And this year and last year, it's largely been driven by the challenges in getting together for a central event, which we've previously done around the AGM. It's been great to have those resources available for us over the last 12 months to then draw on at any time. And I know that I've used them as a good reference and ready reckoner for some of the programs to go back and look at some of that information again. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway. So of course this session's a webinar and your microphone and camera are automatically turned off. So there's a separate control for the speakers. Following the presentations, there'll be Q&A session, so you'll be able to ask questions via the online chat function. So for those of you who are new to Teams, there's the Q&A function and the icon if you're on a computer at the top right of your screen. If you're on an iPad, it'll be the bottom left of the control bar. And it has a little question mark symbol inside a speech bubble. You just click on that and you can type in your questions. Any questions we don't get to today, we'll absolutely make sure we answer them afterwards, and we'll publish the responses along with the webinars, which we'll post in the next few days after we're completed. So we'll get responses back to all those questions if we don't get to them today. If there's a major issue and we drop out, whether reconnect or make sure we send you a new link straight away. But we said that every time last year and we didn't have any challenges, so we're assuming we'll have the same success this year, but just in case, keep a look out for that. So first webinar in the series is going to be Impact through Supply Chain Innovations, which is today's program, and it's going to focus on eating quality and our objective measurement programs, which is a key component of our 5-year strategic plan. So to tell us more about these programs today, the speakers are going to be corralled by Mick Crowley, who's our General Manager of Research Development and Adoption. He's going to facilitate the session for us. And then Sarah Strawn, who's the Group Manager of Adoption and Commercialisation, is going to talk about linking supply chain data. And then Michael Lee, who's the Group Manager of Science and Innovation, and we'll discuss the objective measurement and automation technologies and how they're unlocking new models and data platforms to increase carcass value. So thank you for joining today, and I trust you'll enjoy the session, and I'll hand over to Mick.
That's great, thanks Jason. Good afternoon everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you today about the impact that we're making on behalf of the industry with the investments through Levy and the MLA donor company. And today, where we want to cover today is really about how we're driving the strategy to achieve the goals under our strategic plan. And Sarah Strawn and Michael Lee will get into a few really important examples of how we're driving benefits across the supply chain. But I just wanted to come back to looking at how have we come up with the investments that we're making. And we're operating under the Red Meat 2030, which is the meat industry strategic plan. We've directly aligned the MLA strategy to that strategic plan, and we're doing that through a 5-year plan called MLA 2025. We then operationalise our strategy through annual investment plans, and those are available on our website with all the details of all the programs that we're investing in. But we've been set some pretty ambitious targets through the Red Meat 2030 strategic plan, and we're bringing that to life through those investments. And the targets are doubling the value of Australian red meat sales by 2030, being carbon neutral, doubling the investment in adoption, and we'll talk about that both today and in next week's webinar, where as we increase investment, we're also looking at increasing the rate of return on that investment. And we're going to do all that while we're being the trusted source of the highest quality protein. So I might just jump into the next slide. And when we start getting into, well, how do we bring that to life? There's some really important objectives that we're delivering against that that really bring to life the plan, and they cut across a number of areas of our business and help us, I think, get aligned as a supply chain and thinking about how we work with the production sector. So the first one is around decisions that are informed through data and insights. And one of the biggest opportunities we have is to make sure we've got more seamless transfer of information along the supply chain. Sarah's going to touch on some really practical examples about how that's working, but unlocking the value of data. A lot of the work through our integrity systems company supports this as well. And we've got some really great examples in the MSA program that Sarah will get into. We have some big complex problems that the industry needs to solve. And we've been working for the last 6 years with producers across the country through our regional consultation framework to establish the priorities for our investment. And thinking about how we create and capture value along the supply chain, thinking about how we move from a supply chain to a value chain. And Michael and Sarah both touch on some of the opportunities of where we can create and capture value and get those price signals flowing. We then look at enabling new sources of revenue from non-traditional sources when we start looking at how can we value add environmental services, for example. As we drive productivity, we can also achieve better environmental outcomes and we can capitalise on that. And we'll hear a little bit more about that next week from Doug McNichol. We also look at how can we develop new products that we maximise the value of the whole carcass, and certainly some of the work that we do through the MSA program and looking at how we optimise the harvesting of cuts and how do we retail those products for their best cooking outcome. But equally, we look beyond just the carcass and looking at how can we add value to hides and offal and other byproducts. And that's a really important component of the work that we're doing as well. The theme around Beyond Today's Farm Gate is where we connect across sectors, and we're doing a lot of work and collaborating with the other RDCs. There's 15 RDCs working across a whole range of ag sectors, and we're working together to try and solve some of those big issues that connect for whole of agriculture. And then the last component around strengthening our core, this is where we invest in the fundamentals for industry, and that's around market access, food safety, integrity systems, and animal welfare, where these are absolutely core to what we do as a service company on behalf of industry, and are really fundamental to our existence. So just moving forward then, I guess one of the changes we've made over the last couple of years is looking at how do we move beyond just investing in discrete programs of work, and how do we connect those along the supply chain. So our R&D business unit now covers R&D the length of the supply chain. We look at the consumer insights, we work with brand owners and processors and the whole production sector, from genetics, breeding, feeding, finishing, through to commercialising some of those programs through programs like MSA, and then looking at how do we underpin all of those things with digital agriculture, adoption of new technology, and connecting the supply chain. So if you just click forward, you'll see how we can complete the, just another click again, that when we start looking at, and where we'll get to today is looking at, well, how does the information is collected at the processing sector from brand owners as those processors and brands respond to customer and consumer expectations, feeding that back, that information back through the supply chain to create and capture value. So just onto the last slide from me, and we'll get into some really interesting topics. Just a reminder that we're tying every investment we make back to our strategic plan that sits underneath Red Meat 2030. We really are trying to tackle some of these long-standing complex problems and working more collaboratively across our researchers, producers, as the target customer for many of the outputs of our R&D to drive impact. And then we're connecting as a supply chain, because I think we've got some really great examples we'll hear today. When we do work more as a supply chain, the production sector can respond, and we can create and capture more value back to the farm gate for producers. So it's my pleasure now to hand over to Sarah Strong, who is our Group Manager of Adoption and Commercialisation, to take us through the work that we're doing around feedback and how we're creating and capturing more value. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Mick. Over the past 20 years, we have seen price premiums being paid to producers start to emerge and continue to increase year on year, back to producers that have demonstrated that they've listened to a market insight or what the market's asking of them and responding through the endless amounts of feedback that is available to producers. And Meat Standards Australia is a classic example where we put in place an industry program over 20 years ago now that actually needs the whole of the supply chain and every person in it to value that program, to make it work. And it addressed the consumer's desire to have consistent eating quality and a known eating quality, and really taking the guesswork out of buying beef for them. And so if I use that example of continually striving to better meet that market demand from the consumer, delivering upon eating quality is now just considered the norm. And in this last financial year that's just been, hit a milestone with MSA, in that MSA actually represented over half of all the cattle that were processed here in Australia. So that meant over 50% of all the beef we produce here in this country went under some eating quality scrutiny. And we've seen through the development of the MSA index, which is the metric to back to producers to know the performance of eating quality, and we've seen producers respond to the market wanting higher quality beef, more of that consistent quality, by improving the MSA index. And this year we hit a record high compliance to the MSA requirements as well. And so the program has seen the emergence of many, many brands, over 200 MSA licensed brands now, that have got their own story of where they might be from or the types of beef they produce. But they've given that reassurance and consumer confidence by using the MSA program to provide eating quality credentials. And the market's really jumped on board with this. So the retail sector, the wholesale sector, they're also using those brands as points of difference for their own customers, and they're paying a premium for those brands, and the consumer's paying a premium to them for those brands as well. So in the constant quest to make sure that we're making MSA available to all cattle producers in Australia, and that we are still in touch with what our consumers are asking of us, we continually put consumers into taste test panels. And in this year alone, we've had 19,000 consumers sit down in these panels and make sure the programs are still meeting their requirements. And so with all of this, so when the supply chain, every person in the supply chain does value a program, and in this case, the eating quality program, it means that we can have price differentials along the way. And that in this year, we estimate that based on the price differences between MSA and non-MSA cattle being paid back to producers, that had added up to $157 million in additional returns that went back to the farm gate. So in parallel with seeing our industry embrace an eating quality program and be the world leader in this area, if we can just go to the next slide, thank you, is that we've also seen our industry really increase their use of genetic tools and technologies as well. And so in the past 5 years, we've seen significant investment in the area of genetics to build upon the strong core that we have already built up over the last 30 years. And to really start delivering some new disruptive technologies. Genomics is an example of really shifting gears in this space, making genetic tools more accessible and more usable for commercial producers as well. So on this picture, on this slide, every circle that's on there, it represents over those years where we've released a new tool or technology, or we've invested in something like a new disruptive technology or science around genetics. Things like, for example, things that have come out of this is single-step breed plan evaluations for a number of breeds. Our reference populations now have carcass data and eating quality traits being collected. We've seen the development of genomic herd profiling tools, and we've started down the journey towards a multi-breed genetic evaluation. And so the response to this, those two lines that are on the screen that are heading in the upward direction, which is a positive sign, is that the response to this is that almost half of producers are now using breeding values to make a decision their rate of genetic progress is continuing to improve year on year and contributing financial returns for that as well. Next slide, thanks. So I guess I've spoken just then about the benefits of when we got us all focused on eating quality, and we've been addressing that that using that eating quality feedback. There's a couple of other parts to the puzzle though that really make up and define what is the whole value of an animal once it enters that food chain. So there's a great opportunity to build upon the benefits I was just talking about by connecting more of the dots that we can gather with the various types of feedback that we can get from processors and brand owners. And this puzzle seems to be made up of just a few things that would explain the majority of the variation we would see in animals and their value of those animals. And so I've categorized them as how much meat is there to sell. So we're going to call that lean meat yield in the next couple of slides. How well does that meat eat? So Meat Standards Australia has that covered under eating quality, and we measure that using the MSA index. And what impact does animal disease have on both of these? Next slide, thank you. So in the past 6 months, we've been working with supply chains to identify what are those value levers and what proportion, which is most important. And so that's going to change depending on the supply chain and the types of markets that they're supplying beef into. We're also looking at how we can generate this information and then turn it back into connected feedback back to processors and producers as well. And so this year, over the last few months, we've actually generated lean meat yield data for every single MSA graded carcass over the last 10 years. So that now means over 30 million carcass records have got eating quality information matched up with their yield information as well. And it's been pretty enlightening. And I'm going to explain these pictures on the screen right now. So the image of the yellow bar graph on the left there, it's showing MSA graded carcasses for the last 2 years. So this is the variation or the span of lean meat yield we're getting in those carcasses. So there is around about 15%, maybe a little bit more variation in the actual meat that is available to sell in these carcasses. So what that actually means is that if 2 animals were weighing exactly the same carcass weight, let's use the average of 300 kilos, which is the average MSA carcass weight at the moment, those 2 animals could actually have a difference of 45 kilograms of meat available to sell. So even at current trim prices, if that meat was to go into trim, that could be the difference of $400 between those 2 animals. Yet at the moment, they've probably received the same dollars per kilogram on an over-the-hooks trading grid, yet they've got, in that example, a huge amount of difference in the value that they've actually delivered. And the blue heat map on the right there is showing that for the same MSA graded carcasses, the majority of them, which is the purple squares or the purple circles there, that's the density. So most of them are sitting around about a 58% lean meat yield. But as you can see, it's a huge variation as well. But the point to note here is that line running through the middle of that graph, and it's tracking in a downwards direction. What this is, the message here is when we do increase lean meat yield, we actually do decrease eating quality and vice versa. So there's a real compromise to be struck here because eating quality and yield don't necessarily always go nicely hand in hand with each other. We'll just go to the next slide, please. So another area of connecting the dots on carcass value that we embarked on this year are the linkages between animal disease conditions and whether they actually do have an effect that we can see on eating quality. So what we've uncovered is very interesting, and this is really we're only scratching the surface here, but there is an impact. It was a really quite evident impact in the data that we've got. And the good news is that we know so much about animal diseases and animal health treatments that we can actually do something about it. So we've got some data from a project called Health for Wealth that collected animal disease data across Queensland and New South Wales. And so we matched that data up to eating quality data. It's the first time we have ever done that. And we actually saw that there's about over a 3-point difference in the MSA index on average between a diseased animal and a non-diseased animal. So what does 3 MSA index points actually mean? Well, for some brand owners, and again, this will change by supply chain, but it could mean the meat from that animal makes it into the top premium brand, or it actually could miss out on MSA premium altogether. So my estimation is that on current prices being paid, the differences for MSA and non-MSA cattle, that could actually be the difference of $150 to $300 a head in value or lost value of that animal too. And so on the right side, those circles that are on the screen are showing that the prevalence of different disease conditions and how that has impacted on eating quality, but also on the ossification scores, which is linked to eating quality. And so cattle with hydatids, I'm just going to use this as an example, seem to have the biggest impact on eating quality performance, also driven by their high ossification scores. So this could indicate the animal itself is actually more mature, so it does have a greater disease load, or it's actually experienced quite a bit of hardship because of that disease load. And so through this Health for Wealth project in Queensland alone, there was an 11% incidence of hydatids in those carcasses. So that got me thinking that at an individual level, if this only affected the livers, and hydatids affect more than livers, but let's go with just the livers, that could be $9 to $10 a head. Is actually not recoverable or lost because those livers can no longer enter the food chain. And if that was the case for all of Queensland cattle last year, that could have been about $30 million in lost value for that state alone. So this information, we're starting to connect the dots with the information that's collected now along the supply chain or at the processing sector. And at the moment, eating quality data is easily accessed through the MyMSA platform for producers. And we've just released the Beef Eating Quality Insights report for this year. And in the follow-up email after this webinar, you'll get a link to that. So that's a brand new information where you can have a look at how you might be performing against others. Livestock data link for producers that have access to that can also provide some lean meat yield and animal health data as well. But over the next little while, producers will be able to see all of this in one spot and in the feedback systems. Thank you. Next slide. So that's the beef situation of the impact that can occur when we do respond to a market need. And so that really got us focused, MSA, and it's been quite revealing of what the opportunity still lies ahead if we do connect yield and animal health as well. And the opportunity is just around the corner for the sheep industry, which has got us here at MLA quite excited because the MSA sheep meat program has been around for about 10 years. So it is a well-established program. But it's a pathways program. So it's focused on putting in place best practice management at critical control points where eating quality might be jeopardized. That could be animal handling, nutrition, the processing, or the aging of meat before we sell it to the consumer. So it's worked really well for the industry so far. And so the graphs on the screen are evidence to that. So the one on the left is prior to putting in any of these best practice control measures. This is showing the variation in toughness measured by, so shear force is a measure of how tough a piece of meat is to chew. And so you can see that there's a huge range of toughness there. And this surprised many people. So even 20% of lamb loins that were being sold actually failed to meet consumers' expectations. So it was a really eye-opener at the time for a lot of us. But then by putting in place those critical control points on the right-hand side of the screen, we've been able to really tighten up that variation. But it still exists. And so we're going to be able to do something about that. I'm going to share with you that in just a moment. Next slide. The reassurance for us to get better at describing eating quality and for consumers and to segregate for them what is a 3-star product or a 5-star product is that over and over again, when we ask consumers in our taste test panels, they are telling us that they can detect a difference in eating quality. And they're telling us they'd be willing to pay differently for it as well. So this is the same story that we heard for beef, and we're hearing it for lamb and sheep meat as well in multiple countries, that a 5-star product is worth 3 times as much as a 3-star product, and a 3-star product's worth twice as much as something that doesn't even meet their minimum expectation. So it's a clear message that we jumped onto in the beef sector, and we have a way to do this as well for sheep. Next. But it does mean we do have to pay attention to the animals we are producing. And if we are using that market insight that there is an eating quality difference and consumers are willing to pay us for it as well. So our sheep industry to date has responded really well to the current market signals that have been primarily based on weight and fat. And so we've seen the increase of carcass weight, so a lot of heavier lambs, because that's how the market has been providing some feedback. But we've been seeing this also in the genetic trends over the last 20 years as well. And this is what's on the screen at the moment. So over the last 20 years, we have seen the yellow line, which is shear force, so toughness again. So we've seen shear force increase. So the meat itself has actually been getting tougher. And the blue line, which is intramuscular fat, or marbling as we might know it as well, has been decreasing. And intramuscular fat is a huge driver of eating quality in lamb and sheep meat. So really need to find that balance of how we get the best of both of those, best we try and balance these things. Next slide. Thank you. And so we can do this, so we can bend the curve, and the picture on the screen, an example of some flocks that are doing that. And so these are flocks that are using the foresight of getting a balance between yield and eating quality by putting a focus on that in their genetic selection. And so we've seen a trend here where those lines were tracking similarly to the graph I just showed you, but in the last couple of years, it's turning a corner in that lean meat yield is continuing to go up, so more meat to sell, but eating quality through intramuscular fat is also improving. So they're coming back together. Next slide, thank you. So the opportunity now is that we get on the front foot, we put the consumer in the middle of the room and consider then, well, what meat are we going to produce for them? Because a revolution is coming for the sheep industry. And it's a cuts-based grading system, and we're just about ready to deploy it. So it's getting quite exciting. So it's going to expand on the pathways program that we have got already to measure traits on individual carcasses. So carcass weight will be one, lean meat yield, intramuscular fat, just to name a few. And so the outputs then we'll be able to clearly articulate what's a 3-star, 4-star, and 5-star product for a number of different cooking methods as well. And Michael Lee will follow me in just a moment. We'll actually talk about the technology that's going to unlock this and make it all happen. Thank you. Next slide. So the realisation of what a cuts-based grading system can do is shown here. So it does look like a lot of colourful bits of spaghetti, but that's the point, is there's actually a lot of eating quality variation across the cuts coming out of our current lamb production. And these results on the screen are from our resource flock that MLA manages for research purposes and intentionally has a mix of breeds in there. But when they are all processed, they're all typically the same age. And it's pretty eye-opening because if I pick out just the cutlet, so we all know a lamb cutlet, and that's the bright green line on the screen there. And you can see that it actually goes across all 3 eating quality sectors. There's lots of 5-star cutlets. There's a good proportion of 4-star cutlets, some 3-star cutlets, and some that even actually don't make the grade. So this is the opportunity to be able to use the information that we're getting and deploy a cuts-based grading system to start building the benefits that we saw in the beef sector. So producer feedback can emerge, brands can start to develop, and they can also start to get price differences in the market too. So next slide, and in summary, I guess we're all looking forward to jump on board that message we heard from consumers, that they're willing to pay more to us if we can meet their expectations. And we want them to pay more because they're the only ones that actually put in any money into our supply chain that we can all share back through the supply chain. So it has to meet their expectations, whatever the product is that we produce, and it has to meet the expectations and market specifications of the market we're supplying. So that would be our processors or brand owners, and their insights are coming from the markets they're supplying around the world. And it's their markets and their customer insights that will determine how the value of your animals will be determined as well. So it's likely to be a combination of how much meat is there to sell, so yield, how well will it eat, so eating quality, and what is the animal disease impact on that as well. So the great thing is that this information is collected and we can start to generate feedback about it as well. And it's that feedback that can really we can do something differently on farm and improve and continually meet those consumer expectations. So whether that's through the animal health treatments that we apply, the nutrition that we end up doing, or right down to the very beginning of the breeding decision we make and using the genetic tools available. So thank you, and I'll pass now over to Michael Lee. I have to come off mute, Michael.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, and thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, all. And look, today what I'd like to talk about is carcass value and present some of the research investments that the team have underway related to these technology platforms and platforms predominantly that are in the processing sector. Thanks. Next slide. As I'm sure many tuning in would know, the Australian red meat industry has now for a long time, has a long history of interest in camera-based grading systems. Look, for me, I recall working at Woolworths in the head office in the early 2000s, and we were certainly working there during that time with Viascan, being used for carcass assessments and feedback, but it never got to the stage of basing the payments on digital images. Now, some 20 years later, though, we really are on the cusp of having a number of devices being ready or close to commercialization. Plus, there's some really strong interest from producers and processors and brand owners on using the data that we heard from Sarah, things like eating quality and lean meat yield to really, and indeed animal health to underpin brand and production decisions. So as I said today, I'd like to provide a brief update on the activities MLA has underway in this space, in particular, how objective measurements can improve this carcass value predictions that Sarah spoke to, and how also integrating objective measurement with automation can not only improve the yields, but also the productivity in processing sites, and importantly, the feedback back to producers, on animal data in terms of yield, quality, and health. Next slide, thanks. So each of the devices shown on the screen today are at various stages of development, calibration, and also implementation. And MLA's role as a leader of ArmTech program and also the Meat Stands Australia team is really about the way that the grading is done and how we support industry collect the data, calibrate that data in a consistent way needed for AusMeat accreditation. And pleased to say, over the past couple of months, there has definitely been a lot of activity in this space around lean meat yield algorithms. For example, with Frontmatic, as you see on the picture on the screen there, marbling data with Master Beef, and as recently as the last couple of weeks, almost 2,000 carcasses have been undertaken and analysed. And soon we'll have completed a grading app through the MSA team that's compatible to these units and more to come. So, but importantly, as we heard from Sarah, building data into decision making is the goal here, more so than the technology. It's about integrating subjective measurements with these objective measurements that can underpin a brand as well as production. As we see on the screen today, we really are learning a lot from the lamb, our success with the lamb processing side, using automation and sensors and cameras, now to the beef sector. Today, there's 12 commercial systems running at process speed for a lamb carcass every 6 seconds. There's 5 DEXA units. So remember, DEXA standing for dual energy X-ray units are in place. And we're beginning to see how lamb processors can integrate objective carcass measurement data for lean meat yield predictions, but also guide automated bone-in cutting. And this approach, as I mentioned, is driving our investments into a beef boning automation solution. And we refer to this as a Leap for Beef program in partnership with Tees. So our approach to date has been to focus, now here in terms of the beef side, our focus on the middle and the scribing system. And that's part of 12 key tasks. So if we think about a traditional lamb side, we do a 3-way cut or a 6-way solution. Here in beef, instead of doing a beef side or a quarter deboning or table boning, we're looking at modules that are similar to lamb in that the carcass is initially split into a hind quarter, middle and forequarter. And as most people would know, that middle portion is really where a lot of the value of the carcasses is. So if we can get that right, we can then focus on the hind and forequarter. The image on the right of the screen there is basically the first fully automated DEXA-driven robotic cutting system, not only here in Australia, but in fact the world. And its aim, as I said, is to perform 2 scribing cuts. And as we move later this year and into next year, the next phase is to go from 2 to 8 cut pathways. And it's been estimated that with this really accurate subsurface sensing and repeatable cutting process, that the benefits in beef boning automation will exceed greater than $20 a head benefit with these accurate and transparent feedback data systems that can go back to producers and then also forward brand owners. So as I said, on the screen there, we've got essentially 12 different cutting tasks, and we're really focusing on the middle and the scribing section to achieve that greater than $20 head benefit. Next slide, thanks. So with that middle section containing the most expensive cuts, the team's focused on how best to determine the ideal cut trajectory for strip loins and cube rolls. And as we see on the screen there, we're looking at vision analysis. And so here the chine bone is removed using a bandsaw, a robotic bandsaw, and it's based on an image from a CT scanner, which is scanning the vertebrae with CT technology, and that's been developed specifically for 3D cuts for beef boning. As we can see again on the screen, we're really talking here around what's often referred to as lean manufacturing principles. And it's around the cost of production and reducing waste. So the focus for objective measurement technologies is to derive this accuracy to grade for these quality traits that Sarah again spoke to, plus this cutting line accuracy. And these provide a powerful data set which we can provide the feedback to optimize carcass value. At the same time, productivity improvements that embrace these principles of lean manufacturing reduce waste. And that allows us to look at opportunities to upcycle low value, probably perhaps more than the word waste, into higher value products. And so the team's got a number of projects underway that are looking at supply chains that go beyond butchers and supermarket meat units, and how do we use food technology platforms to make meat snacks? How do we use the types of products that we can now more predictably derive and get into the nutraceutical market? We're doing projects that are looking at making bone broths. So as Mick mentioned at the start, we're looking at how do we create new products, as well as how do we consistently produce the same product and be able to harvest those cuts on a consistent way. And as Sarah mentioned, how do we then reward the producer providing those types of consistent products? And this really adds to creating the demand for the whole carcass and builds on the sustainability credentials that many are doing on farm around carbon neutral by 2030. We're now saying, how do we be more sustainable in the processing sector by essentially getting more from less? Next slide, thanks. So in summary, what's basically in our line of sight here at MLA is there are several cameras that we're supporting that can deliver the improved consistency that is needed. Importantly, though, as we heard from Sarah, there are things that we can do now with the data that we don't need to wait for technology. We're continuing to sort of focus on what needs to be done to have the technology credited, but we're also focused on a real deployment strategy. In fact, that's why late last week we announced a MLA donor company, a dollar for dollar matching call for proposal on our website, where we want to partner with industry, we want to partner with brand owners, producers and processors, and we're looking for around 10 value chains who want to look at the cameras, who want to look at using data to underpin their brands and underpin their production systems to really test and design the types of infrastructure that you need around data, the infrastructure you need in using some of the grading cameras. And again, we're prepared to not wait for the cameras to be accredited. We really want to support industry and the early adopters there. So again, we'll share that information at the end of this session. And we're really, as I said, keen to support industry adopt this new model. And the third point on the screen there, we're continuing to look at what are the value traits or credentials that the market's desired. So we've heard about lean meat yield, eating quality, animal health. We're also looking at technology, objective measurement technology that can support sustainability credentials or a whole of animal life quality. And a lot of the team is doing that work on farm with digital ag sensors and technologies that we hope to report next year on some of the successes we're having there. So thank you again for opportunity to share. I'll pass back to Mick now.
Thanks, Michael. Great work. Thanks, Michael and Sarah, for your updates. We're going to move into a panel session now and do a bit of a Q&A. There are a few questions that are coming through the Q&A chat function. If you do have some questions, please drop them into the Q&A and we will pick them up. Any that we don't get to on the call, we'll respond to those post the event. But I think we'll get through most of the questions that are in front of us today. The first one I've got is one for you, Sarah. And the question is, are there specific markets in which consumers are willing to pay more for quality product?
Thanks, Mick. So there's a few bits to that question. So what I think is worth sharing firstly, it's been quite amazing in the taste testing that we've done around the world. So we've now well and truly over 100,000 consumers around the world that we've asked, what do you think about eating quality? And would you pay anything differently for it? And it's quite amazing the results that it doesn't really matter where we do ask those questions, whether it's the demographics haven't made a difference, the country hasn't made a difference, to that every consumer says that they think 5-star product, for example, is worth twice as much as 3-star. And that's the message I had on the screen actually looks exactly the same for beef. The only difference we have seen is that the Japanese consumer has said they might actually be willing to pay up to 3 times as much for a 5-star product as well. So that's probably a little bit about the difference generally in consumers. I think what we're seeing though in, say, retail sector, food service sector, is the use of brands to create like a tiered approach when shopping. So they're sort of become a fit for purpose approach as well. So if I know what the occasion is that I'm trying to buy for, we're really seeing that you can either, whether it's at retail or at food service, there is something there at a premium level or your everyday level, sorted by cooking method as well, or whether it's at food service level, we're really seeing the use of brands as points of difference, having their various stories as well. I think we've got a whole area in MLA that's dedicated to market insights, will be in our webinars later on in the next couple of weeks. But the market insights that MLA can generate also really help us to know where to play and who will pay a premium for our products as well. So not just looking at who's got the most people in the world and who's got the biggest market, but who's actually got the ability to purchase our product as well. So if we're going to go to these efforts to improve our quality and have a point of difference, who's actually willing to pay a difference for that too? And just for example, we've just done some recent insights on the sheep meat program and looking at what is food service doing around the world and what's predicted to do over the next few years. And for example, Malaysia has been predicted to have a 10% increase in what they might spend when they eat at restaurants, and looking for lamb and sheep meat as well. So, that's an indicator that if we're looking to place a premium brand or even just a brand with credentials, those type of market insights really help as well.
Yeah, that's great, Sarah. And I think we'll continue to see, as global demand increases and global salaries increase, the demand for quality product will continue to grow. Look, while you're on the hook, there's a bit of a related question around the animal health component that you touched on. So there was a comment and a question. So it's interesting to see the relationship between health parameters and meat quality, and the impact on dollars. It's a big impact, and a big impact on farm is obviously expected too. The information is collected in export abattoirs for years, but producers can't access and address the issues on farm. It's been talked to provide producers with health feedback, but no progress. Can we still afford to continue not making the most of this information? So, Sarah, do you want to give an update on how that information has been handled and how will it get back to producers?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's correct. I only really touched on what that meant from a carcass perspective today. Those animal health conditions absolutely has productivity implications as well. As you can only imagine that some of those health conditions reduce weight gain and feed efficiency, feed conversion efficiency, and so on. So there is a little bit of animal health data being released through Livestock Data Link for selected supply chains, but the real opportunity has just really started to come about by connecting this and actually demonstrating that if you connect the animal health data with something like eating quality that people are using to determine what goes into brands and so on, we really are joining the dots and helping supply chains understand the value of releasing that feedback as well. And we can actually starting to put dollar figures around that. And that connection I showed today of health data and eating quality data whilst it might be sort of known that, of course, that makes sense, there'd be an impact, we actually hadn't really done that work yet. So this is really, we're having lots of conversations with processors and brand owners now to look at their specific data and what that might look like, and look at how to release that through the feedback systems like My MSA and Livestock Data Link as well. So I think there's definitely in the next couple of months, Mick, a few months into next year, is we'll see that our producer feedback systems will evolve to start pick up some of this connected information as well. And then what would be really important though is that once you get all that data, what do you actually do with it? Well, then in parallel to that, there'll be producer adoption programs, which we already do have, but will be connected to a supply chain to help the supply chain work with their producers to look at their customised data, and we'll support that with training and education and resources around that as well.
Well, thanks, Sarah. That's great progress. Sounds like we've got a little bit of work to do, but we'll keep the communication flowing off the back of that, because that's going to be an important area of work. Michael, I've got one for you, and it's related to the upcycling of low-value cuts. Is MLA looking at byproducts such as alternate uses for beef hides and sheepskins? Do you want to just take us through some of the work happening in that space?
Yeah, thanks, Mick. Certainly do have a very large investment in deriving high-grade collagen. So whilst I might not be the target market for my nails and skin, there is a huge global demand for wellness and beauty products, nutraceutical products, and inside the hide and the sheepskin is some amazing protein peptides that we can derive collagen out of. So we've got a number of work underway there, and importantly, it's whilst it's taking the whole hide and the whole skin, it is actually including the face pieces and tick affected hides as well. So we're really targeting the hides and skins that are very, very low value, if of any value, through to could we just completely create a new opportunity outside, the leather industry or the mat industry. To give you another example, other than hides, I mentioned, bones before, bone broths and tallow. And the beauty about when we look at it rather than just a product, but a whole byproduct solution, even products today like fertilizers, we actually end up producing a more nutrient-rich fertilizer, which is what farmers want, by actually getting the types of proteins and phosphorus out of the products by harvesting, the bone broths and tallow and collagen products out of them. So, some really exciting work in there. And the other one I'd probably call out in terms of co-products, more so than byproducts, is some work we're doing with offal and organs. So doing a lot of work around thyroid glands, and even today we're partnering with companies making liver capsules and thyroid capsules that are targeting the US market with Australian products. So yeah, that whole upcycling, creating new markets that potentially are sold in a chemist more so than sold in the butcher shop is a big area of interest.
Thanks very much for that, Michael. That's really important. And I guess there was a follow-up question, if I could. It's a question that let me just pull it up again. Sorry, it was just around the call that you've gone out with to get partners to look at value chain engagement from a donor company point of view. Did you want to make some comments around that, please?
Yeah, so we'll certainly share the link after this session, but we're really keen to support probably up to 10 value chains. And what we mean in terms of support there is our traditional dollar for dollar matching through the MLA donor company. We're keen to sort of support industry, understand what type of infrastructure is needed around the data, as well as putting time aside to use these different grading cameras that are referred to. So we'll cover the cost, or we'll co-fund the costs in trialing some of this equipment, in understanding how do you use the data, export the data, and then obviously the third part is how do you develop a brand and test in the market some of the information that you've harvested and I suppose, sorted the animals for the right market. And like any project we look at MLA, it's very much, should you do it, and what did you find, more so than technically can it be done. So this funding opportunity will really open the opportunity for 10 companies to get some co-funding to test this opportunity that Sarah and I have been talking about, of using lean meat yield, eating quality, different traits to harvest the right cuts for the markets that want those types of traits and credentials.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's great to see you driving the adoption of the R&D outputs, and if industry are prepared to partner, I think it's a really great collaborative effort where we're not using producer levies, but we're getting private investment and that can benefit the whole supply chain and connect with the supply base. Sarah, just coming back to you now, just on the MSA sheep meat program, when are you planning on implementing the new MSA grading system for sheep meat?
Yeah, thanks, Mick. So the technology to unlock the new system, if you like, and to make it available requires that intramuscular fat technology that Michael touched on. Now that feels we still have to have one of the devices come through its accreditation, but we believe that's not too far away. And so we've got once a device becomes accredited, we have the ability to implement it. And so I think comfortably say by early next year that we'd definitely be seeing the opportunity for brand owners to use it. The producers right now can become MSA registered, so there is nothing holding people back from getting involved with MSA already. So to become an MSA registered producer is free, it's very easy, and you can do that through the MLA website and the MSA pages there. So that's really about getting prepared. So you can already start getting prepared with the information around MSA and our sheep genetics website as well, which there'll be a link in the follow-up email after today to our genetics hub, can also provide some tips, if you like, on how to start thinking about that from a genetics perspective as well, knowing what you saw today and what's in the pipeline to be coming very soon. Thanks,
Sarah. Looks like there's been a few early movers starting to really get ready for the new model to come out as well. So that's really encouraging. Michael, I might just come back to you. It's sort of a similar question, but related to automation. There's been a fair bit of investment in the automation space. When do you think that we'll start seeing the beef automation modules being completed? What sort of level of throughput is expected?
Yeah, thanks, Mick. So look, our partners are on track for definitely a 2025, perhaps 2024 completion to demonstrate to industry. We're really those key prototype modules that are referred to, as I said, definitely 2023 will be completed, but realistically in operation in 24. In terms of throughput, the modules or the design's targeting around 400 sides per hour. So to give you some context, the fastest side chain in Australia is around 520, I think it is, that's running at the moment. And we've got sites running at 125 per hour. So at 400 sides per hour, it's definitely keeping up with the throughput that's needed. I think also I mentioned in the talk there, that real value of precise cutting and getting the right value of those cutting lines at that type of throughput will deliver around about $20 per head benefit. And what we saw with the lamb automation, that delivered around $7 a head benefit. And we've got a lot of economic modelling that shows typically about half the processing gain is then passed back to producers. So, that $20 per head of benefit, potentially could be around $10 per head for cattle, which is a great number. And then that any additional improvement in productivity. So there's around about 20% productivity improvement we're seeing because of that middle section in the early modules that we've looked at. Again, we've realised that when we look at lamb productivity and gains, that should go also back to the producers. So I suppose in answer to your question, Mick, the throughput can keep up. The good thing about productivity improvements in processes, the processing sector, around half of it does go back to the producers. So there's some real direct benefits there as well.
And Michael, just while you're still on the hook here, just looking at OM, objective measurement, a lot of the work's been done in processing plants, sensors in boning rooms. What's happening with live animals, and what type of technology is supporting objective measurement on the live side?
Yeah, look, I obviously didn't talk to that in this talk, but there's a lot of ag tech sensors or Internet of Things sensors on farms. So we've got a program called Digital Agriculture, which is definitely, that is the focus around feed base and productivity on farm. We've got smart tags that could potentially track where the animal is. Others even looking at the heartbeat of the animal. And so this type of traceability could lead to a whole of life welfare tracking down the track. So that's certainly something that we've got up there as an aspiration to follow through to, there's farms that are using sensors measuring, water availability, water levels and usages. We also got a project that's underway that's looking at soil biomass levels using satellite data, and we've even got some renewed interest from some producers looking at drones for mustering, building on some past work that we've invested. So it's on farming, the feedlot. We've got some work that's looking at how to best control feeding levels. There's some projects, some bunk box projects there. And we've also had some promising results from a small portable handheld microwave device that measures fat depth in live animals that could be some really interesting applications pre-slaughter to improve market compliance, plus in plants. That's to do with the lamb GR tissue depth that, again, Sarah sort of briefly touched on. But again, like any tech solution, we're really keen not to be seduced by toys, by technology, really trying to understand that it's solving a real problem and offering a solution for farmers and the feedlot sector for that live animal. Otherwise, it's really an expensive widget. And the data, what you do with that data is, again, equally important rather than does the tech work. So no, thanks, Mick, for the opportunity. We do have a lot of activity on farm in the OM space as well.
Yeah, sounds good, Michael. And look, I'm conscious of time. We're just pushing up towards the close of the webinar. We'll try and answer this last one, and then I'll wrap up. So, Sarah, just on a genetics front, what effect, if any, does hybrid vigour have on eating quality characteristics?
Thanks, Mick. I guess just to state straight away is that there's breed per se has never really come up as a defining input into predicting eating quality for beef, I should say. And so we've seen there is much variation within breeds on eating quality characteristics, as there are between them as well. But I guess there's an opportunity there to use hybrid vigour to allow to get the best of multiple traits from various sources. So when I say that, I mean, if that's the way to improve things like increasing marbling or intramuscular fat, improving weight gains, or reducing the time for an animal to meet its market weight. So if that's possible through the use of genetics, then absolutely will benefit eating quality characteristics. That's also achievable within a breed too. So there are a huge array of breeding values for many breeds that are based around eating quality. And so, yeah, there's lots of information there to make those decisions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. And thanks very much to both Michael and Sarah for your contributions today. They were great presentations, and thanks to everyone for the questions. Look, we're pushing up against time now, so we will be publishing the webinar. It'll be on our MLA website under updates.mla.com.au. You'll be able to access the webinar recording, and you can And we're also very keen to get your feedback. So there will be a survey that will be providing the link at the end of the webinar. So we'd really love to get your feedback. And our next webinar, we did have a question around CN30 on the call today, but we will hold that over because our next webinar, which is on Monday, the 25th of October, the topic is impact through sustainability innovation. And one of the core components of that webinar next week is giving you an update on the work that is underway around carbon neutral by 2030. And so that will unpack a lot of the work and innovations that are available under our CN30 initiative. So we look forward to rejoining next Monday, the 25th, and hope to see you all there. And with that, we will close the webinar. Thank you.